Spacefarer. What the UFO? It's Caleb. Hi guys, welcome back. This one's going to be a little off the cuff, a bit of a discontinuation of the ongoing interview series. I'm finding that I have some stuff to say. I want to share some of my takes that I've cranked up after a couple of years of thinking about this, and I'm really enjoying engaging with you guys in conversation. So what I'm hoping to do today is tip off a conversation that we can engage in on YouTube or wherever else you'd like to talk to me. X is another place. We have a Patreon group. Starting at the beginning here by thanking everybody who's supporting the show on Patreon, patreon.com/WTUFO. $1 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever you feel like you can give. It's a huge help. And if you like what I'm working on and you want to help me do it better, supporting on Patreon is a fantastic way to do that. Another great way to do it is you can support me directly on YouTube. YouTube has a cool subscription membership program. They take a bigger cut, honestly, than Patreon, but on the other hand, it's sort of easier because it's connected to the channel. So there are cost benefits to either. And then you could also sign up on Buzzsprout, which one of my friends did because he's very kind and technically inclined. So you can support us on YouTube's membership program or Patreon's program or Buzzsprout's program, or you could go to Spacefarer on Etsy and buy something there from me/us, and that would help support the show. I am really looking forward to expanding this show next year and making more progress with all of you in both a conversational capacity and a media outreach capacity. But the frank truth is that I have to make progress financially first. And this show is not doing that. So it is basically a hobby. I love doing it, but I'm not making enough money doing it after over a year to justify continuing it as a business. So it'll continue to be a hobby, and I really appreciate you supporting it if you do support it. But that's just a frank truth statement about the nature of reality in my world. Okay, let's talk about some of the more exciting aspects of reality and pivot into UFOs. I'm going to talk about disclosure today and what it means and what we should expect following it, because I think that's a juicy subject. And I think with regard to that big picture juiciness, this could be kind of a part one of that conversation. People have written whole books about this. There's a book by Bryce Zabel and Richard Dolan called The Day After Disclosure or something like that. After Disclosure, maybe AD. And it's interesting. I would say I wanted a little bit more from that book. I'm looking forward to talking to those guys someday and expressing that in person. But I think we can do better as a community. I think we can come up with some even more juicy details about how this could play out. And I want to sort of explore the intellectual space around it. So this is going to be a little bit freewheeling. I have some structure, but I'm also going to kind of freeball it, see where it takes us. I have kind of a loose idea that we could maybe borrow an idea from the philosophy world, which sometimes uses phrases like what we talk about when we talk about disclosure. I think that kind of wants to be what this conversation is. So I'm just going to stagger in and start, and then we can explore wherever that goes. And I want to remind you again that I'd love to start a conversation here. I'm going to do this part of the talking, but if you have ideas and responses to this, I'd love if you could meet us on YouTube, come to the show's chat page, and share what your thoughts on disclosure are, how you think it's going, whether you think it'll ever happen, what it means to you. And so I'm going to start there with what disclosure means to me. I've heard a lot of people say maybe disclosure's happened already, or maybe disclosure's impossible, or the real disclosure is the friends we make along the way, right? So my take on disclosure is pretty literal. I read it as, or I interpret it, or what I mean when I say disclosure is major governments, I'm in the US, so I think of the US, stating publicly that they, the government and the military and the intelligence communities that support that government, are aware of non-human intelligence operating on and around Earth. So governments stating that they are aware of non-human intelligence on Earth. That, to me, is the literal interpretation of disclosure. They are saying they knew something and now they are sharing that fact with us. Then within that, there could be lots of different kinds of disclosure. They could say, we have been reverse engineering craft collected from these beings. That's a reasonable expectation. We think they probably are doing that. I think reasonable people who are paying close attention to this have that expectation that they should tell us that, because that is in fact what they are doing. Then they could say or not say some important things about what they think these beings suggest in terms of the nature of reality. Like, we've determined that these beings imply that multiverses are real, or that there are like other layers to physical reality that we don't perceive with the naked eye, but they're all around us, and these beings can move in and out of those layers. That's sort of getting at the metaphysical quality. They could tell us we've learned about souls and beings that come from spiritual planes into our aspect of reality, and they bring machines to do that. I don't think they're going to say that, but they could say something like that. A really important question right off the bat that everyone's going to have for them is, have you, the government / military / intelligence community, made contact with any of these beings? Now, it sounds, if you're into this subject, like the scuttlebutt on that situation is yes. There have been some instances of contact. And we know from the literature, from just like reports of UFO encounters, that there have been some instances of radio communication back and forth. They're usually just a UFO repeating back a signal that they got of like a fighter jet or something. The fighter jet will send a "Who are you? All clear" kind of signal, and the UFO will like echo it back. That's happened, I think, at least 13 times. There's a list of this type of case in Robert Powell's excellent book, UFOs, A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't. So we know that some form of communication, sort of in quotes, has happened. We don't know if there's ever been like a sit down formal agreement between a non-human intelligence and some like representative of a military intelligence or government agency. There seem to be suggestions that that has in fact happened. That pops up in Age of Disclosure. People make the claim a couple of times. If it's true, that's a really, really big deal, obviously. And that is the kind of thing that it's annoying that they haven't shared with us, as I've discussed in other episodes. But that's a really big question. And if that has happened, that's sort of one world of futures. And if it hasn't happened, that's another world. That second possibility, I think, could explain or could relate to the hesitance of militaries and intelligence organizations to disclose anything, because there's not a second sentence that's obvious for them to say. If they say sentence 1, we're aware of non-human intelligence operating around Earth, what is sentence 2? We have communicated with them, we've worked out an agreement, and you're fine, or we have figured out how they operate technologically and we have protected you against them. Probably we can't say that second sentence because we've maybe figured out a little bit about it, but we don't likely have robust defenses in place. And it seems intuitive that we also don't likely have robust diplomatic engagement in place, but that's not necessarily the case. Like, we may have ongoing communications of some like pretty serious degree within deep intelligence work. There was a really interesting interview with a former intelligence agent. I believe he spoke to Jesse Michaels about this and explained his long training and communication basically with non-human intelligence as part of that training was like a really important element of the work he was doing. So that sort of implies, if stories like that are true, that implies that there may have been a deep ongoing communication of some kind between our intelligence and military agencies and these non-human intelligences. So basically, the basket of binaries there that we're setting up for the government disclosure possibility is they could tell us that they're non-human intelligence and we've been communicating with them, or they could tell us they're here but we haven't communicated with them. At this point, we probably have some reason to expect that they have been communicating with them. And so we would have more questions like, who are they? What do they want? I want to pivot a little bit to talk about 3 modes of what I would prefer to term discovery than disclosure. Because again, I think disclosure is governments telling us that they know that this is true. I would distinguish that from military agencies reporting to Congress, for example, that UFOs are physical objects that they haven't identified as human tech or non-human or adversarial tech by humans. I'm mentioning this to basically ping the 2021 Office of the Director of National Intelligence report to Congress. You might be familiar with this. It's called Preliminary Assessment of Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. I believe it's great. 9 pages. It's a really easy read. And everyone should familiarize themselves with it if they haven't already. But that to me is not disclosure. It's really important scientific evidence, but it's not the same as saying we, the government, know that non-human intelligence is here, yada, yada. Okay, I think I've hammered that enough. That's what disclosure is to me. But discovery is just the process of humankind going from a state of not knowing collectively that there are non-human intelligences operating around Earth to knowing, understanding, accepting that that is in fact the state of play. That could happen because of, I can think of 3 potential things. One would be government disclosure. The government says this is real. Now we have discovered as a people that non-human intelligence is operating around Earth. Okay, that's one. Then 2 could be a scientific avenue, scientific discovery. This, as much as it excites me, seems like the hardest of the 3, because when you really think about it, science is going to move us closer to this determination, but it's going to have a really hard time finding a smoking gun. So like even if Avi Loeb and the Galileo folks had $100 million to put up cameras everywhere and do like really deep AI analysis of what's going on in the skies, they would be capable, I would imagine, of finding a bunch of UFOs. We wouldn't necessarily therefore be able to determine that those UFOs were non-human technology. We would be stuck with, okay, these things move really weirdly, but as far as we know, there's only ever been human technology around Earth. So that could be secret US tech, or it could be secret Russian or Chinese tech, right? And the problem with that secrecy potential is that sort of no amount of disclaiming by the government will ever really convince us, because we know that they're trying to keep those secrets. That relates to how we should consider their denials of the reverse engineering program, because they have to deny those programs. There's special waived access secret programs. Those exist. They're real. And people who know about them are legally obligated to deny they exist, except to a tiny handful of people who are also legally cleared to know that they exist. So that means that it might be even like Marco Rubio's job in a legal sense to cloud the waters around these programs and deny that they exist, or avoid the subject at least when asked. I'm not sure if Rubio would point blank lie to us about that, but it might be the letter of the law that someone should, if they were point blank asked about a special access waived program. You can look those up on Wikipedia. They're real things. Special access programs, the word waived is in there. It might be at the beginning, waived special access program, something like that. Okay, so science discoveries that could really make headway would probably have to involve something that was publicly accessible. So we have an egg, we've recovered it. It's, as far as we know, technological. It doesn't look like any human technology we have ever seen. Ideally, you'd want some like intrinsic material quality that you would say humans don't know how to produce this kind of magnesium or something, or like the molecular structure of this metal is such that it should not have been possible to replicate it in any human lab, or to create it in any human lab. And then, similarly, you could imagine a biological being being a part of that. If they were, say, like the remains of a being, and there was like indisputable scientific evidence accessible in some way to the broader public community, as in, come on down to Harvard or Stanford and you can check out these remains and analyze them. And, they're not in a government lab somewhere, or they're not like being hidden in a country that's now shutting out scientists, like what I think is happening in Peru. So we would need access to it. But my point really here is to say that the scientific discovery avenue is going to be slow. Like it's it's really promising and really important, I think, that we do a bunch more scientific research. But it's sort of hard to imagine the scientific research delivering the smoking gun. I'm going to let my dog in the room. Okay, so it's possible. It's possible that we could find something scientifically compelling enough that the scientific community came around to not just a consensus of curiosity, but to a widely held hypothesis that non-human intelligence are the best potential explanations for the phenomena that we're seeing. We're nowhere near that now because we're not even at a consensus of curiosity, which is to say we don't even agree scientifically that this is worth looking into and spending a large amount of resources and people's time researching. We obviously need to get through that. If we got through that, then you have to ask yourself what kind of scientific discovery would be sufficient to qualify as discovery, that we had in fact proven that non-human intelligence is on this planet. It's murky. I'd be curious to hear what you guys can come up with in terms of like things that scientists could discover, which would convince us all that this was 100% real. Then that leaves the third thing I can think of, and this would be, I think, the most decisive, and that would be some form of public contact. So far, from what we can see, the non-human intelligence that appear to be operating around Earth and interacting with people have declined to engage with people publicly. It even sounds like, as of 1968, this is a fact from Richard Dolan's recent book on USOs, unidentified submerged objects, that as of 1968, the sightings switched from predominantly daytime to predominantly nighttime, which suggests that UFOs are hiding. And if there are non-human intelligences operating around Earth, which again, I always say it seems like there are, then the fact that we've been seeing them in piecemeal, here and there, a million sightings of their craft, hundreds of thousands of people meeting them directly, but they haven't allowed us to catalog their existence publicly, that suggests to me pretty strongly that that's not an accident. It would be pretty weird, I think, if it were just like a total coincidence that these things had never landed anywhere extremely public and gotten out and said hello and made themselves available biologically for testing or introduction to a large group of people. I think it's reasonable to conclude that they are avoiding that circumstance. They are deliberately, for whatever reason, not engaging with us. Maybe it's prime directive reasons. They don't want to mess with our trajectory. Maybe they're nervous about how we might respond. Maybe it's just simple military reconnaissance operations. They want to control and corral us, and they're here to observe, but they're not here to engage. And their instrumental goals have nothing to do with telling us that they exist. Or maybe they're just like worried we'll freak out and they're trying to do it slowly. Or maybe something else. But I think something you can't avoid if you think non-human intelligence is real, which I do, and I think many of you do, and that they're here on Earth, which I think, again, we also probably agree on. I think you can't avoid the observation that they're intentionally withholding their public presence. So that leads me to this third big category of discovery, which would be some undeniable public contact. And that is, as you've heard me say, if you've been listening to the show, something I think we can work on, like you and I and our friends and people who are interested in this subject. We can call our Congress people and ask them to press for military and government disclosure. We can contact scientists, try to get them funding, try to encourage government to fund more science. But we can directly go out and attempt to contact beings ourselves. And we can't, most of us can't do the science. Some of us can do the science. Almost none of us can do the disclosing. Some of us are whistleblowers and leakers, and like, God bless and bravo to those people. But what the rest of us could do, other than raise awareness of this subject, is we could try to directly engage with these beings. It sounds from the scuttlebutt around the world of UFOs that there are some ways in which people have reached out. There are many, many examples of people who show up on all the socials who say, like, I'm in contact with some kinds of beings. Like, I'm reaching out to them now. Sometimes people send me videos and say, look at this. Isn't this weird? Like, it showed up in my yard. What do I do? Or like, I think I'm reaching out to them. Well, that's great. Like, I think you should keep doing that. But I think you should start thinking about how to do it in a way that can advance the collective project of our total understanding of the situation. So if you're engaging in CE5, Close Encounter Paradigm 5, whatever, it's supposed to be an addition. I don't know if Stephen Greer invented this, but it's supposed to be like a tack on to the classic Hynek Close Encounters scale. 1 is a sighting, 2 is a physical effect, 3 is like a being encounter of some close kind. 4th maybe is abduction. I actually don't know what the 4th one is. I forget. But 5th is humans initiating contact of some kind, generally by some like meditative or like mental outreach approach, platform, whatever. The Skywatcher guys say they're doing it with a techno signal. So maybe you could try to build one of those and see what happens. But the point is, you shouldn't do it just in your backyard of the woods. You should go somewhere public, and ideally you should bring some friends who are really into it. And maybe you should set up a little bit of a drum beat and get people to come do this together. So I'll talk more about this another time. I'm sort of working on a project around it. I'm thinking about just like building a very simple website that can bring ideas about that subject together. So curious to hear what you have to say about this in comments on the YouTube channel if you want. So we've got these 3 potential modes of discovery. 1 is government disclosure, 2 is scientific discovery, and 3 is public contact. A fun thing to think about in public contact, along the lines that we discussed in the scientific avenue, is what would have to happen in that contact to sufficiently convince people that this is real. Like, ideally what? Is the gold standard like an alien goes on Colbert? Is the gold standard an alien makes themselves physically available to scientific research and says, like, I'm willing to just come live at your universities until you figure out that I'm real and who I am and yada yada? That would be really useful if you are non-human intelligence and you're listening to this and you're considering the possibilities. Why don't you go ahead and just do that? Thanks. It would be great. But short of that, like if you were doing something in a park, you'd want them to at least wave, right? Like you'd probably need them to get close enough that people could get really good video. And this would need to happen repeatedly. And then sooner or later, one of these beings, we're going to just like have to interact with them in a poking and prodding kind of way, which is awkward. But it's going to have to be part of the conversation, I think, for humans to understand a sufficient amount about these beings that we can move forward structurally. And that leads me to one other really big subject that I think would have to happen after disclosure. So I guess let's move for this section into what might happen after disclosure or after discovery. And I think 2 things are really obvious, and maybe we'll think of a few more here. One is that everyone who hasn't already gone through the process of ontological shock that people like you and I who have been paying attention to this for a few years have gone through will go through some version of that. So there will probably be a couple years of everybody else onboarding and being like, wait, what? Who's Jacques Vallée and Hynek and Project Stargate or whatever? And going on the journey and probably learning about all the weird little bunny holes that lead off in all the various directions about like psychic stuff, remote viewing, interspiritual communication, then the like nuts and bolts stuff about how these things move and how they can move through space and through water and through air and through even physical matter. People will read the books. People will ask the questions. They'll ask the same 15 questions that we all ask when we start this journey, which are like, wait a second, how could I possibly not know about this? How did the science community miss it? How did the military miss it? Or how much have they known for how long? Was this kept secret from presidents? Did any of the presidents know? Were there any communications? Are there different kinds of beings? Are they intersecting? Are they interacting in negative ways? Like, are we in a war? Are they in a war with each other? What's going on? Like, so there will be a massive sort of rippling ontological effect that will probably last for decades. I mean, the first shock of it will be like a couple weeks, but then there will be like a slower shock of a couple of years. And then there will be the big picture adjustment, which will probably unfold on the scale of decades, honestly, as we spool up the academic infrastructure around really researching this in the myriad ways it will require, from the biological investigations to the physics of the craft to the historical examinations of ways in which beings like this could have intersected with our past and maybe even like affected our trajectory as a species, either biologically or culturally, because we know we've got all these stories about gods, and as soon as some real intelligence appears to be on Earth in a flying craft telling us what to do, it's going to put those God stories in a pretty different light. So the massive ontological shock will be widespread. That'll be community-wide for the human community. And that is a place where we who have been thinking about it can be helpful, and we should try not to be smarmy little jerks in that moment and be like, yeah, I freaking told you that aliens are real. We should be like, yeah, great. I'm so glad you're here and like asking these questions with me, because I've been really curious about this too. And what do you think about this? And what questions do you have? And let's compare notes. That's, positively engage with each other in that process. But the next really obvious thing that we're going to have to do is establish some kind of diplomatic relationship with these beings, because every nation on Earth has a diplomatic relationship with the other nations of the planet. Like, the most important nations or the most powerful have really important relationships with each other. All the nations have theoretically some relationship through the United Nations or other international treaty organizations. So if they're a force on this Earth with technological intelligence, then we have to engage with them diplomatically. We've got to know who they are. And I'm saying they a little casually because the strong implications of the form factors we've heard about in the data are that we're talking about multiple groups. So at least 4 different kinds of beings, maybe a whole bunch more. They might all be part of a similar society in the way that, humans have different form factors, but we're all humans. They could all be very different creatures that are fundamentally operating in some sort of political structure that we just don't yet understand. But they could also be members of different cultures with different political structures and different agendas. And we need to find out. So we're going to need to be in relationship. We're going to need to enter into a diplomatic relationship with at least one of these kinds of beings and start learning about them and about the other beings on the planet. We can't really do that until militaries and governments admit that they're real. So I guess I'll close on that. I've been going back and forth recently between being like kind of optimistic that something might happen and pretty sure that nothing will. And I guess if I had to guess, I'm sort of leaning toward more days than not. I would say I'm like 60-40. They're not going to tell us. Like, the powers that be are not going to tell us this is real until we find out from some other way that they're real. And then they'll step to the podium, because then they'll have an incentive to calm us down. And at that point, they can say, yes, we know that it's real. We've been working on this. We've got some information. We've got some technological development. We're not going to share it all with you, but yes, we want to let you know we've got a handle on this. But I think they're probably, again, I'm guessing here, but my guess is they're not going to do that until and unless they have to explain something that has now obviously happened. So that would maybe not be a public contact moment, although a public contact moment would qualify, but like a mass sighting that was indisputable, huge triangles, like, Independence Day style, like giant craft, undeniably visible by thousands, millions of people, streaming on all the news channels live. Like, at that point, I don't think the military and intelligence community will keep going, oh yeah, geez, we don't know what's going on here, crazy. I think they will have an incentive to say, we've been researching this and we have some development. But in a vacuum, absent that stimulus, the incentives are just all wrong for that. The only exception I can think of is late in a president's term when they don't have anything left to lose and their levers for affecting the world are getting thin. They have dwindling abilities to impact the course of human history. At that point, I don't know, I think you could maybe see it. I think you could see a president thinking, I'd like to leave my stamp on history by being the person who opened this door to the future. And I'm hoping that, I'm recording this in 2025, I'm hoping that the current administration might move in that direction. It doesn't seem to me like we're close to that now. I think even at recording this the week of December 4th, the recent interview with Marco Rubio in which he says, hey, yeah, I was just reporting what people told me, man. I don't know anything. This is a bad indicator that we're not on the brink of some big government reveal. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that somebody does come out and say something. But my general feeling about this is that all the incentives run in the other direction, because all they know for sure, this is an idea from my brother, is that this would change things a lot. And they don't know in what way it would change things. It could really negatively impact the economy. Like the stock market could take like a 30-point nosedive. The bunker market could explode. People could riot, people could burn a lot of stuff or kill each other or kill themselves. Like there could be a massive trauma response. And we don't know that would happen, but we don't know that it wouldn't. And then militaries also don't know, and governments in general don't know how people would feel about them. And I think Wendt and Duvall wrote this very famous paper about sovereignty and the UFO, in which they explored this idea. And their basic conclusion was governments are counter-incentivized from revealing this information because it disempowers them, makes them seem less in control of the situation, because they are. It would mean revealing that we humans are technologically inferior to another present organization. Nobody wants to do that. Maybe there's a case that one of the major powers would try to do it to destabilize the other major powers' control. Like maybe China would have an incentive to release this information, but even that would counter China's impression to its own people that it is in control. So I think there's just like a really deep counter incentive for powers that be to reveal this information. And I think that means we have to try other avenues. I think we should keep pushing for them to tell us more about what's going on. And honestly, I want them to cross that bright line. I want them to admit that we, as in the United States military and intelligence community, know that non-human intelligence operate around Earth. And we have some of their materials, and we've been working on reverse engineering them. It's like, 3 sentences. Short of that, like everybody else, I'm very frustrated with the hinty sort of question game. And I don't like it when people say, hey, this is real, but I can't tell you why I know. Everybody's complained about that, and understandably so. I really appreciate that people are whistleblowing. I would say I would like to ask, say, Colonel Carl Nell, when he says there is zero doubt that this is real, why is he using the passive voice there, that there is? Does he have no doubt? Why does he have no doubt? How does he know that this is real? We should do some more digging on this subject, and it would be great if the mainstream media ask better questions about it, but that's a horse I think we've all probably beaten enough in our own time. Maybe went a little bit off track there. So to try to close this with questions, I'd love for us all to communicate, think, explore the space together about what we think disclosure might be, when we think it might happen, how we think it might look, what you think might happen after disclosure. What do you think is the most likely avenue of us getting to discovery? Scientific? Is it like personal contact? Is it military revelation? And then what implications are there downstream for humanity? We could explore that in a little more detail another time, but the big picture starts with diplomatic engagement. All right, so that's a rundown, exploration, run around of disclosure and some thoughts enclosed in the disclosure discourse space. I would love to invite you to communicate about your thoughts and feelings on this subject. Come on over to the YouTube channel. It's at What the UFO, I believe, on YouTube. You can find us also at WTUFO Show on X, or you can find our Patreon at patreon.com/WTUFO, and we talk about stuff there too. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation, consideration, musing exercise, and I'm curious to hear what you're thinking about too. So please reach out. Keep having a good day. Everybody stay healthy. And that's the show. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying it, please like and subscribe and share this with people who you think might like it. You could also directly support us at patreon.com/WTUFO for $1 a month. We do some chatting in there and you can propose questions for future episodes. You could also check out spacefair.etsy.com. That's our company's main merch site where you could support us commercially and pick up some cool gear. Thank you again for listening. Hope you have a lovely day.